Hey everyone, so rank starts next week, and with it for some of you, position ranks is getting turned on as well. So today we're going to have some more details and an interview with Ed, or Riot Sat Magic, who is in charge of all of the changes. North America, so NA, and Korea are the preview regions for the test, so if you play on those servers, this will cover what to expect, and if not, then the plan is to play normally for Split 1. After a few months when Split 2 starts, we'll all swap to position ranks, which has been tracked behind the scenes the entire time. If you aren't sure or you don't remember, position ranks is a new system where you're going to have a rank for each position that you play, like each role. No overall rank at all, and the aim is to help improve matchmaking quality and a lot of the issues from autofill. Basically, it is a lot like how ranked is right now, except if somebody is autofilled or off-rolled, they should still be able to compete at that level because they are placed in a lower game. In theory, everybody in the current game that you'll be in is about the same skill level at the role that they are playing, and it should be a little bit more competitive because of it. You'd also have something called splashing, which means that if you play an off-roll, some of the LP gain or loss will splash onto your others, meaning all of them will climb a little bit together, and you do have to try even when you get autofilled. That is kind of the basics and the newest part of things, and we're going to hop into the interview I had with Ed to explain everything in way more detail and what to expect. So I hope you guys enjoy this style of video, and make sure to let me know what you think of this stuff down below, or you can go and stalk him on Twitter. Hey guys, we're going to be chatting today with Ed. You can see him on the screen now, hopefully, and we're going to be going over some position rank stuff. So it's a rank for each position, no overall rank. It helps kind of improve matchmaking quality and any autofill issues that we have in the current system. It kind of goes a little bit of a way to solve it, right? Is that kind of a brief why we're doing this and what it actually is? Or do you want to explain it a little bit more? Yeah, that's a pretty good description of like roughly what it is and why we're doing it. I think the why is actually really important, because without that, it might seem kind of like, hey, why would you add 5 ranks?
What's the point,
right? The only thing I would add on to that in terms of like kind of what it is, it's 1 rank for each position. And I think the really important part that kind of goes along with that is whenever you win a game, you earn LP for the position that you played that game, and a little bit of that LP does kind of splash over, if you will, into your other positions to kind of recognize the fact that some skills are more transferable than others, things like macro play or vision or things like that.
It's almost like you're reading the script in front of me, because that was my next kind of thing. But
I stole it.
Yeah, exactly. Before we get into splashing though, I just want to, so there's a part that you said where everything is being tracked behind the scenes, right? Like literally as it was this season. So in theory, there's no risk on this, anything. Like we go through a split of it and everything can be changed back. So there's like nothing, if you're in a preview region, you don't have to worry about anything because it can be undone or it can carry on. It doesn't really matter, right? Like behind the scenes.
Yeah, obviously, like, no one here is hoping, like, oh yeah, hopefully it goes up in flames so that we can test reverting it. But I think one thing that we really learned as a takeaway from Dynamic Queue was sometimes things go wrong with matchmaking. You know, it can be problematic sometimes, or hard to predict what'll happen. And sometimes you just get, player sentiment, it just doesn't ever get there, right? And players don't get behind the feature. And I think we needed to make sure when we were making a big rank change like this that we had kind of that emergency fallback, right? That we could turn to if we need to. I think the other side of that is, let's say in a more happy world, let's say position ranks is like great, and in both NA and Korea, like it's well received and players like it and it's good experience. Well, we want to be able to turn it on for other regions too, right? And we don't want to reset everyone's ranks when we do that. So I think it's important that regardless of whether you're in a preview region or not, we're tracking both things so that when we decide kind of which direction we're going to go, for sure, whether it's position ranks, which we hope, or if we have to turn it off for any reason, we have that kind of the opposite of whatever the region has so that we can switch back over.
That's good. I'm surprised you're allowed to talk about Dynamic Queue. You mentioned those 2 words. It's like a
the lights dimmed a little bit. And like, yeah. Someone's waiting outside for me now. Someone
you're gonna get the cut. But if you had to give like a 30-second, hey, this is what splashing is, can you just quickly give a very quick rundown of what it actually is?
Yeah, the quick rundown is basically every game you play, some LP is going to go to your other positions, whether that's plus LP or minus LP. So give you a couple examples, right? Let's say I play mid. I win that game. I get my plus 25 LP for mid, and then let's say I get plus 3 or 4 LP to all my other positions that I have a rank in.
And likewise, when I lose a game in mid, I might lose minus 15 LP to mid, and I might also lose minus 2, minus 3 LP from my other positions. And then, so in the scenarios I was describing, where I might get a bonus or I might get an additional penalty, those are stacked on top of the normal splashing. And typically they only apply to the position that you actually queued for. So in the example where I got autofill to support, if I win that game, I'll get a bonus to mid, whatever I had queued for. And if I lose that game, splashing, actually I think splashing applies across all positions equally in terms of when it's magnified losses. And so, yeah, that's basically the idea of what splashing is.
Before we really talk about position ranks at all, it's kind of like without splashing, nothing would work. And I think a lot of people's issues with it, splashing solves. So, yeah, I think like that is kind of the crux of everything, and that's kind of the first thing I want to get into. So we're talking about like it being a core way to get people to care about their off rolls, right? And to stop people trolling and stuff like that. Because I think that's like one of the biggest issues that people are going to have with it is like if they get off rolled and it's not tied to their main rank as much, then they're not going to take it very seriously. So can you just kind of explain for everybody how it should limit like what people are trolling in games, or like making them care a little bit more about their off rolls, even though we have position ranks now?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. Early on, when we were working on position ranks, we didn't have any concept of splashing. It wasn't actually until kind of after we announced the feature to players that we really kind of went back to the drawing board after hearing some of the concerns that they had, and like figured out, hey, what is the right solution here, and came up with splashing in the way that it is now. And when we did that, we thought about a bunch of different things and how splashing could actually help address those. One of them is competitive intent, right? And the reason splashing matters there is what is the reason why with position ranks someone might not care about their games, right? It's because, well, hey, that doesn't affect the rank that I care about, so I don't need to worry. I just go troll in those games. And in the worst case, a player might actively queue for a position that they don't care about so that they could let off some steam or throw some games or make someone's life hell. And we don't want that, right? So splashing helps in that sense because honestly, for the vast majority of players, even, and I think you see this with dodging for the most part, for the vast majority of players, even a small amount of LP loss is actually a pretty big deal. And so we can actually start LP splashing fairly low and still be very impactful, right? No one wants to just lose LP, even if it's a little bit, from the position that they care about. And so the way that splashing can help there is like, hey, you get autofill to support, you lose that game, you lose a little bit of LP to your other positions, and you don't want to do that, so you try harder at support. That doesn't catch everyone, unfortunately, and so we had to think of, well, under what conditions would we want to modify splashing, right? When should it be harsher or more impactful to your other positions? And we came up with kind of two scenarios that we felt were really important. We didn't want to just punish players when they weren't trying. So what we wanted to do was start with a bonus. And the way that works is when you get autofilled, if you win that game, instead of your normal splashing, which maybe is like, we're going to tune it, so I don't want to be too prescriptive, but maybe +3 or whatever to your other positions. Instead of +3, maybe it's closer to +7 or +8, right, as a kind of an autofill bonus. And so that's the positive side of it. Like, hey, thanks for doing that. We know you didn't make progress in the position that you wanted to. And then on the flip side, we can say, hey, if you've been sort of losing lots of games in that position, that support position, maybe you've lost 10 out of the last 10 or whatever, which is exceptionally unlikely for a player who's really trying. Maybe it's okay for you. If that's you, I mean, maybe it's unlucky, right? Which might tell us that you might be at a rank that you actually shouldn't be at, in which case we should be calibrating you down anyway. But actually, it could be indicative also of you not playing your hardest or you not trying to win. And I think in those situations, we can take that splashing that's pretty small, around -3, and we can start to kind of bump it up, right? It could get maybe as high as -15 or whatever. And we can actually, the nice thing about the system, and one of the things we're going to be looking for in the preview, is we have lots of levers where we can tune what those numbers are. And so based on how players feel and based on what community sentiment is, we can actually say like, hey, we don't think that splashing is penalizing enough when you're not trying, or we think that splashing is way too harsh and we need to turn it down. And we can make those adjustments actually pretty much on the fly, often without really any meaningful downtime of the system. So that's actually really awesome for us.
I guess the other thing as well that people are going to ask is, how does that not make having each individual position have a rank? How is that not going to take up a ton of our time if we want to climb in different things? Because one of the things is that the aim was to make it less of a grind, right? Like rank does, you don't want to make it more grindy or anything. And I think there's like a bonus thing, catch up kind of deal in there. So if you can go to that, that'd be perfect.
Yeah, so it's going to really depend on what your perspective is as a player, like what kind of a player you are. So I'll talk about maybe 3 examples. For a player who is a pretty typical player, and actually we released a dev blog right alongside our dev diary video, and so pretty much players could literally just, not stop watching this video, but finish watching this video and then go read that. But
Thanks,
but the basic idea is, yeah, I got you. The basic idea is that for a typical player, that player is likely to play about 2 positions, probably more of one than the other, and then they're probably going to play some support or other off-position games over the course of the season. I think that makes sense. That's a lot of players recognize that is a pretty common way of playing the game. For that player, what's going to end up happening is their climb is going to be really quite similar to what it is today. Because of the nature of splashing and other things like that, they'll probably end up putting a similar number of games in to get their main position to a similar or maybe slightly higher, maybe slightly lower rank than they were able to achieve last season. I would not expect a typical player to play have to play at least substantially more or even a little bit more games to get to the same point. It's likely that your secondary position will probably be a little bit lower than your primary because you're not playing it as often. And it's likely that, honestly, for a normal player who maybe plays 100, 200 games in the course of a season, they might not actually even have any of their other positions through placements, right? It takes 8 games to get through placements, and autofill on average is about 5% of games for a typical player. So like, do the math, right? That's not very many games that you end up playing off that was kind of off positions. So it's likely that your primary and your secondary will be ranked. If you're a one trick and you're actually able to get that position all the time, it's also going to be a pretty similar climb. Like if you're a support main, for example, you can pretty much get your position whenever you want it. And so it's going to be very similar to today, except instead of having a single rank that is gold or whatever, you'll have a support rank that is gold, and all your other things will probably be unranked unless you choose to play them. So that really just leaves players who play more broadly, right? Does the situation get a lot worse for them, etc.? And specifically, we wanted to look at fill players, right? Because there are some players who are just like, I don't care, I'll play anything and I'm good. And for those players, what we actually did was we just baked a rule into the system that uses splashing. So if you queue as fill, you'll still get LP for whichever position you play, so you might climb slightly slower in any one particular position. Although, let's be honest, when you queue as fill, you do tend to play more support games, so I would say on average you're probably going to see more gains to support. But then what we do is we basically tune up splashing. We give you a splashing bonus to all your other positions. So instead of getting that maybe +3 LP or whatever, it's going to be more similar to if you got autofilled every game to your other positions.
Okay, so if we talk about the preview then, so it's like basically for one split, you're going to have it in NA and Korea, see how it goes, tweak it as you go, and then basically have a fully built product, I guess, by split 2, and then that's when it should, in theory, get turned on for everybody else, right? Is that the idea?
Yep, that's the idea.
Cool. So why did you pick NA in Korea? Because obviously I'm a bit salty. Most people think I'm American. I'm actually English, funnily enough. So I play on EU West. But I guess
how does anyone think you're American?
I don't know. I get recognized in game that like, you can't be the real fighter. He's NA. I'm like, I don't have an American accent. That does not work. But yeah, so because obviously on EU West it's one of the biggest servers, right? I think. Yep. Is that partly why? Okay, so is that partly why you didn't pick that one and went for competitive servers like Korea, NA, but not necessarily the biggest ones?
So to be honest, we considered all of our regions, and we actually kind of stacked them up and thought about, hey, what would the pros and cons of doing a preview in all the different regions be? And really, there were two things that were particularly important to us. One was we needed to make sure that whatever the regions were, that they fell under the general category of like globally competitive, right? And you could argue that NA isn't, but just for the sake of interview, let's go along with it, right? But basically that means like, hey, is this region considered generally a relatively competitive region in the grand scheme of things in esports? And I think Korea certainly fits that definition. NA, you could argue, doesn't fit that definition as well as EU. So now let me kind of get to my second criteria, which is it's also really important given a feature like position ranks, where its success or failure is really going to be largely dependent on player reception and how it feels. It's really important that we are able to kind of coerce all of our dev team here in Los Angeles to actually go experience it firsthand. And if there's pain, experience that pain. And if it's enjoyable, experience that enjoyment, to understand what are the trade-offs of the system, right? Whether it's working properly or not. So I think that's really critical. And kind of a slight third thing that I think is really valuable that we also get from North America is we get a very tight sort of feedback loop, right? We can hear directly from players in North America in similar time zones to where our dev team is located. We don't have to translate the feedback. It's already in English, right? And we can leverage that kind of in real time to make changes if we need to make changes. So I think the combination of Korea and NA kind of helps us get the best of both worlds. It helps us get a really competitive region that will kind of validate the competitiveness of position ranks if the feature ends up working as we expect it will. And we also get the tight feedback loop and the non need to translate everything that we get from NA. And I think the combination is really good. We certainly could have done EU. I think we sacrifice a couple things like time zone and multi-language when we go to EU, but we definitely considered it, and so that's the basic reason.
I was going to meme you, but honestly, that is actually a pretty good answer, so I don't even feel like I can. I think the last thing I want to kind of end on is, I don't know if you're actually allowed to talk about this or not, so let's try. But so you said that you had a kind of machine simulation thing that kind of played through last season as if position ranks were a thing anyway. So season 8, but we had the season 9 system in place at the same time. And if you can just explain like that a little bit, like what it kind of did behind the scenes, how it turned out and stuff, I think that might help like reassure people that the system is going to be very similar anyway. Just with like a few more good things thrown in on top.
Yeah, so it might surprise you, but in the past, we have generally been fairly careful about how we make changes to systems like matchmaking, because typically when you change a matchmaking or MMR system that, you really actually need to see how they play out over like a lot of games. I mean, often we used to put changes on a small live environment to kind of see how they would actually play out, because we really didn't have any tools to help us understand what the change would be in advance, which like seems crazy, but it's actually quite complex to build tools like this for our system. So but when we sat down to do ranked rework, we knew that basically like, hey, we're screwing with people's LP. We need to actually do the extra work to ensure that the system is going to be really stable. And so we did a couple things to do that. One was we built a lot of tools that could help us understand, that could help us basically take data from live servers and kind of rerun it in a sense to see with new code how would that data have played out, right? If we took 1 million games and ran them through our new code with all of our new changes, what comes out the other end? What would people's ranks be? What would people's MMRs be? All that kind of, what kinds of games would we create in matchmaking, and what would they look like, right? And then we can look at all of that data and compare it to what actually happened on live and compare and contrast, right? We can see, oh, these kinds of players end up at a lower rank than they otherwise would have. These kinds end up at a higher rank. We don't want that, so we'll go back and make changes and then do it again. And it also helps us spot check, because we can take individual people like from the team whose experiences we know really well. Hey, I played lots of games this season, this happened to me or whatever. And then you can kind of sit down with them and go, okay, well, if this happened with position ranks, here's what your ranks would look like. And you can kind of like, it's really interesting, because a lot of people we sat down and did that with, they were like, oh, interesting. Like wow, it's weird seeing like how this would have happened if I had position ranks. And I think a lot of players are going to have a similar experience. But yeah, for us, it was really about being able to pre-validate what the kind of experience would look like. And that's not to say that we won't miss things. I think it's almost certain that we will miss some things and there will be some bugs and stuff like that. But we wanted to be a lot more confident going into the season, because if you can remember, like rewind a couple years back to when we launched Dynamic Queue, we did a bunch of matchmaking changes around the same time. And if you recall, matchmaking times were kind of problematic for players. We had to introduce autofill, like an entire feature, because queue times were so high for players. I think like those were the kinds of things we were trying to avoid. Along with the simulations that we did, we also committed to putting a lot of the tech onto live. So after we ran a bunch of simulations with like positional matchmaking and things like that, we actually put positional matchmaking into normal draft in a ton of regions. And we've been monitoring it ever since then. I think that was back in the summer when we launched that. And likewise with the swap detection that I kind of called out to you, and the position detection, like what position are you playing? We've been testing that in normal draft as well. So it's kind of a combination of building tools to help us understand and validate up front, and also then putting our money where our mouth is, right? And like testing it out on live in advance of it going to ranked to make sure that the positional matchmaking is stable, the position detection is stable, all that kind of stuff. So
hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you, Ed, for stopping by again.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime.
If you've got any questions, guys, you can always drop them below, but go and harass him on Twitter. I'll throw that down below as well. Ask him questions.
Twitter's always good. I'm always watching that.
Sounds good. All right, well, thank you for watching the video, guys, and I'll catch you next time.
Cool. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, just hang off and do peace.
Yeah, I just like peace.